Okay, here we are at Maxine's house, home on Long Island in New York, on December 28th, 1987, and Grandma has come to visit us for Christmas. We've had a big Christmas. The children, Maxine's children, Bob, Rick, and Derry, have left, and this is a couple of days after Christmas, and we're going to pick up part 2 of the tape of the sort of story of Jessie Gordon Baldwin's life. And Maxine will be asking some questions.
We finished the last tape at the time of your marriage in 1920 in Gary. At that time you moved to Hitchcock, right?
That's right.
Tell us about what happened then in the next 10 years.
Oh, I couldn't tell that in a week.
Just at the high spots.
Well,
Let's talk about Hitchcock. Where did you live there?
what part of Hitchcock?
Let's talk about Hitchcock. Where did you live?
We moved into a little furnished cottage, right, not too far from the school. I was going to teach school, and Forrest had a good position in the general store.
Mm-hmm.
And things looked rosy. And they were good. We enjoyed it very much. I taught there the year before, so I was quite well acquainted. The school was crowded, and they put me downtown in the town hall. In fact, the jail was over in the corner of the building,
Mm-hmm.
to teach 25 little first graders.
There wasn't room in the schoolhouse?
Oh, it was just too crowded, and they were building, but the building was not any more than started at that time. And so I taught on Main Street, and they fixed quite a nice playground in the back of the building. There was a back door, and we got along real well. However, our first little offspring, Beth, made the announcement that she was going to come. And so I thought I should quit teaching school, and the superintendent said, no, by no means do you need to quit teaching. So I kept on teaching. And I got along pretty well with teaching first graders. They learned rapidly, and they seemed to like me, and things went along just fine. I had taught the first grade there the year before and had very good results. But I could see myself slipping. I was not getting the results that I wanted. And I didn't feel very well. And the superintendent had told me that when I really felt I should quit, that he'd have a substitute there and I wouldn't need to worry. So I told him, and he had the substitute there. And she took over. It was a married lady in town that had taught primary before. And about that time, we got a chance to move into a much nicer home. It was quite a new house and lovely woodwork, and we'd accumulated enough furniture, so we had enough to get by. I had to make curtains, of course. So that was where we were living when Beth was born the next summer. The sad part of it was that the Depression was coming up and business was slowing down and things weren't good, and as the policy is, the last man hired is the first man fired. Forrest lost his job.
So you were left with no income and a new baby.
That's right.
And what year?
1921, summer.
That's right. So Forrest worked at odd jobs, whatever he could get. And we got by hook or crook. We couldn't depend on help from either side of the family because my dad was having a real bad time financially. He had several hardships hit his work all at once. Besides terrific hospital bills and a flood that washed all his machinery away and the machine shed and so forth. Then his cattle got TB. He had a good herd of Holsteins, was going to sell them, but he had to sell them as canners. He didn't get much for them. So that was his hard luck story, and Forrest folks had just moved to Hitchcock because they were, Dad Gordon got a job at the elevator there. But when the Depression got bad, he lost his job, so they were without work too. He was. So all in all, it was pretty hard times.
So how did you end up in Wolsey? How did that come about?
That was a peculiar thing to end up in Wolsey when I never had ever been in Wolsey. Knew no one here at all in Wolsey. But there was a new mail route put in at Hitchcock. In fact, there'd been one put in right after the war, and Forrest's brother got to be carrier of that.
That would be Uncle June.
Yes. And then there was another one put in, now this going the other direction out of town. And Forrest was appointed temporary carrier for that. It only went 3 days a week, but he had to get it. And at that time, the routes were not car routes. They were more horse routes, and you could use a car in the summertime when the roads were okay. But the roads weren't roads as we know them today, they were just trails.
Mm-hmm.
So he had to get he bought 3 horses and a buggy because it was winter time when he got the appointment. And then he got his bonus, soldier's bonus. When he got that, he got a second-hand Ford car. So he had his equipment to carry mail. With the 3 horses, he would change off 1 horse each day.
He'd run them 2 days and rest a day.
Yes, to go the full time was just too hard on him. Well, when he went to take the examination for this route, civil service examination down in Huron, the man that was giving it, Mr. Pugsley, said to him, if I were you, I would not write this examination for the route, for the rural route out of Hitchcock, because if you don't get it, you would not be eligible to write again for a year. And my understanding is that you really need this job. So he wrote the examination for any route in Beadle County. And one day he came home from work. It was the 22nd day of March, I think. No, it was probably the 20th. And he said, well, I got my appointment, but it isn't for Hitchcock. It's for Wolsey. I said, Wolsey, where's that? And, he says, you know, I was over there this summer with Kenny Boris. And I was telling you about Wolsey. Well, I said, I never been there, never heard of it until you told me that. But, are you going to take it? He says, there's anything to do but take it. And I have to report the 22nd.
2 days away.
Mm-hmm. So all he could do was just get in the buggy and 2 horses hitched to it and trailing 1 horse, and away he went to Wolsey, 20-some miles, 22 I believe, 21, I guess they called it then. Leaving me with a baby alone in that house.
Mm-hmm.
But I had his folks living there in town. And they sure helped me out. And he had a married sister out in the country. And her husband said he'd do the movie.
That would be Aunt Mead or Aunt Flo?
Aunt Flo. Russell Ferris was.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I think Aunt Mead was going to Aberdeen Normal. Or maybe she was teaching over by Dolan. Both Nellie and Al Mead taught a little bit out of Hitchcock. And they both went to Aberdeen Normal in order to get prepared for it. What next?
So he came, then you had to move. And you went on the train, as I recall. Packed up Beth. Uncle Russell was seeing about moving your household things. And you took the train to Huron.
That's right, but Forrest couldn't find a place to live in Wolsey. So it was a couple of weeks before he found anything.
I see.
And in the meantime, I was sleeping at Gordon's with Beth
Mm-hmm.
and was trying to get things lined up to pack. And it was in the spring of the year, and the so-called bottom was going out of the roads.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought we had things loaded pretty good. There was a hayrack and a lumber wagon, two outfits that took our things. And then I went on the train the next day. I didn't go the same day. But I took Beth, of course, and had my suitcase because I'd stayed at the folks a while. And when I got into Wolsey, here was Uncle Russell to meet me. But Forrest wasn't in from the route yet. But Uncle Russell took me up to the house, and the people that lived there hadn't moved out yet.
This was the house where I started growing up, below the schoolhouse hill.
Yes, but by the time you arrived, we had built onto it,
Mhm.
made it bigger. Well, this lady was real wonderful to me. She had a little girl just a year older than Beth, and she had the high chair there, and we put Beth in the high chair. And they had unloaded the night before,
Mm-hmm.
but they had hit a sleet storm coming over. So everything was covered with ice.
Hmm.
And this lady, Mrs. Bales, had wiped everything down dry.
Oh, that was nice.
And then she was busy packing her own things up to get out of there. She was going down, she was moving to Huron, but she was going to live with her mother a while before she went. She had a husband around there, but they didn't stay together very long. I think they were not legally separated at that time, but he was there to see about some of the things to get out that he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So
You got settled in there. Did you do any teaching then in Wolsey?
I wasn't very well. It was the worry, I think, over having no money and a baby coming. And I lost a lot of weight. And I had weighed 125, and after Beth was born, I weighed 105. I was a pretty skinny mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't very strong, so I had to be careful about what I did. But anyway, we got established there. If I didn't have a cold, I could talk better.
Well, Wolsey at that time, Grandma, was population about the same as it is now?
No, there was more. Wolsey had 2 railroads and it had 8 mail trains a day.
Wow.
And Huron had to depend on Wolsey for the Milwaukee Railroad coming in from the south. So there was a lot of, well, Forrest did taxi work. He'd meet those trains and people
And he'd take them to
take them
Huron.
where they wanted to go.
Now that would be by horse and buggy or by car?
And that was by car. He had to get our car over there. Max Gordon drove it over when he thought the roads were
More
good
passable.
enough so that he could get through. But the low spot along by Vanilla was all underwater. So he drove right down the railroad track for a couple of miles. But he got it over there.
Well, so then Wolsey was a bit bigger, and
It was, at one time they had 1,000 people in Wolsey.
Really? I didn't know that.
And it was the city of Wolsey and not the town of Wolsey.
mhm.
But I guess when the trains began to be taken off, the Depression grew worse and worse, and people moved out. They moved out to California or
Well, World War II.
Texas or something.
Well, was this the time where the Sears,
No.
or
No.
that was
Sears-
much earlier?
Sears were there much earlier.
Okay.
The Milwaukee Road wasn't even there when Sears was there.
Yeah.
Just the Northwestern.
Well,
Then Wolsey got reduced to a town, right, not too long after we moved there.
I see.
so Forrest was doing both the mail, rural mail route, as well as some taxi driving.
Yes, he did the mail route first. That was,
The primary job.
yes, and we were so hard up that it took us a long time to get out of debt. And he was working at anything he could get. And I remember one time somebody came in and they wanted to go out in the country to Felix Clarenball. I never heard the word, and I didn't know that part of the country or anything. But Forrest had promised to do something for somebody else, and he couldn't take him. So he told me just how to go, and it was at night. And I had to drive those country roads where I didn't even know where I was going to take these folks out there.
Well, that would have been now about the time that June Ellen was after a couple of years, June Ellen was born.
Well, I don't remember whether that came before or after. But there was 3 years difference between June and Beth. And my friend Catherine thought that if I got back to teaching school, I'd gain weight because she knew how I enjoyed teaching. And there was a place out in the country that the teacher had to quit. And so they were looking for somebody to finish the term. So I renewed my certificate by correspondence, studied the book Future of South America, and wrote a,
And that's what it took?
for that time to renew my certificate. And I went out and taught
What did you do with Beth?
and hired a girl to take care of Beth and do the work. So when I got home at night, I didn't have anything special to do. She was a girl that lived there in town, and she just come up for the day.
She didn't go to school?
Well, she graduated from
I
high
see.
school. But she never went on to college.
You're ahead of your time, Mother. That's what all the young yuppie mothers are doing now. They're getting their nannies in to take care of their babies so they can go back to work. And you were doing that 60 years ago.
Well, they feel that they're under pressure to do it, and I certainly was under a lot of pressure, but it was partly because keeping house didn't seem to agree with me. I just couldn't gain any weight, and they thought I could gain if I got to doing something else. And that was why I had a girl too, instead of taking Beth out to somebody.
Right.
What did you teach then in the school outside of Wolsey? All grades or?
Yes.
Grade 1 through 8.
I believe I had every grade then, the way I remember it. It was a big school and some big boys.
How many students would you have there, Grandma?
Oh, I don't remember whether it was 18 or 16.
Wow.
That's a lot.
In that one-room schoolhouse.
Mhm.
So you had to be pretty well versed in social studies for the 5th grade as well as geography for the 8th grade and so on.
The only thing that ever bothered me was the 8th grade math. And that didn't bother me then, but it did the first year I taught school.
How did you get there? Did Dad drive you out in the
He
morning?
took me out and came after me.
Hmm.
And we got a new car, Chrysler. We were very
Really?
happy with that car.
They're sounding more and more yuppie, but
I was happy with it. Well, we didn't have 2 cars. He traded the old one in first
I
for a
understand.
Ford, and it found out it was a reconditioned Ford, and it was just breaking down all the time. Then he traded that in for this Chrysler. Well, the next year, the Wolsey school was crowded, and so they decided if they could get somebody to come in and teach from 11 to 12 and from 3 to 4, they would, to relieve the intermediate room's teacher. She had the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th, I believe. A room full. Anyway, they hired me to do it, and I was to go up there at 11 o'clock and for 30 minutes have a study period in that same room that she was teaching. Then the 1st grade, 1st and 2nd grades were dismissed to go home at 11:30. And I took the 3rd grade into their room and had the recitation.
Mhm.
And the same thing in the afternoon.
Hmm.
And then Beth went to the neighbors, to Juergens. Mrs. Juergen took care of her those
Mhm.
2 different hours through the day. But ask me a question.
Well, then you continued to teach there until June was born.
No, that was what I was thinking about. I hadn't any more than gotten a good start, probably taught a month, when June made her announcement that she was coming. Well, I didn't want to go through the same thing I had with Beth, so I resigned right away.
Mhm.
So I didn't really teach too long. Okay.
Then 18 months later, Keith came along.
Yes.
So you had 3 little kids, so you had your hands full then for the...
I really had my hands full because June was quite delicate. She contracted about every kind of a disease that came along. She had pneumonia, very critical. They didn't have penicillin then. And she was always a fussy baby. She never would sleep at night, so I didn't get much sleep. Then Keith put in his announcement, and when he arrived, the doctor said, "We're not going to nurse him. It's your babies are getting gas from your stomach because you're so gassy." And so they put him on the bottle. And he didn't gain, and he lost weight, and we tried all kinds of food. And he was a big baby, weighed 10.5 pounds, and he got down to 7 pounds.
My.
And it took 6 months to gain back that.
Hmm.
But he came through and was okay. But it was we had to feed him every hour, night and day. And so there was, for several years, that I didn't get much sleep.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like having a boy after two girls?
We were so busy that we didn't even stop to think of that. Just taking care of. Of course, Forrest was thrilled to death, and I was very happy too. It was real nice to have a boy.
What did you do then during that period of time for recreation, and who were your friends then, Grandma? Did you go to dances or the movie pictures or Eastern
take care of
Star
babies.
or take care of babies?
Well, we did get out some. Forrest had made some friends those 2 weeks that he was here before I came with the Legion, in the Legion. It was a new organization, and they had a Legion hall and pool table and so forth. So he met quite a few people, and the wife of one of these men came to see me right away, and she took me to Ladies' Aid and insisted I go to church.
Who would that have been?
That was Bessie Bauer.
Oh, I've heard you talk about her, yeah.
Now that church would be the Presbyterian church.
It was the Presbyterian church, yes. First Sunday I was there, I started to get ready to go to church. And Forrest says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to church." "Where are you going to go to church?" "Well, I suppose that beautiful church that stands up there on the hill." "That's the steeple." "Do you know that's a Lutheran church?" I said, no, I didn't know it was a Lutheran church, but I said, I'll go to it anyway. "Well, you don't need to. There's a Presbyterian church down on Main Street." So he kept Beth and took me to church. But I wasn't very happy going to church. Those Presbyterians were pretty cold. There was one woman that spoke to me every Sunday. Aside from that, I was practically ignored.
Mm.
Really?
Took me a long time to get into that church. And I didn't like Wolsey when I first moved there. Well, Beth came down with whooping cough, and I didn't dare take her anyplace
Yeah.
because she had contracted it before we left Hitchcock, and I didn't want to get an epidemic started in Wolsey.
So that kept you pretty close to home in those
Yes.
first weeks.
I didn't join any organization. I think maybe I went to Rebecca's once because I joined the Rebecca's at Hitchcock. But I didn't get much of a bang out of it, I guess. Anyway, I dropped to Rebecca's. I didn't keep my membership. But Bessie was a Royal Neighbor, and she took me to Royal Neighbors, and I joined there. That was the year June was born, before she was born, that I joined. And no, at that time we didn't go to dances. I wasn't able to dance. I just didn't have that much
The energy, yeah.
energy. And Forrest was working pretty hard, maybe all night some nights when he was doing taxi work.
Mm-hmm.
Then he got a job in the farmer's store to clerk afternoons.
I thought that mail carriers were not allowed to hold other employment until they relaxed that in World War II.
At the time that he took that work, you were allowed to work. And then later, he and another band, Newton, who ran another store, bought the Opera House and ran movies. And in competition to Richard Senehall.
At the Cozy Theater.
Mm-hmm. And Forrest came from work one day, and Mamie Balvin, Frank's sister, was working in the post office. And she said, when he came in, she got him over in the corner and said, "You know, there's a new order come out today, and you're not allowed to hold another job." So quick before the inspector knew anything about it, he went down and talked to Aunt Newton, and Aunt bought him out. so he wasn't in business anymore.
Well, never mind. I'm trying to figure how he could have got around it, and that wouldn't do much good today.
Well, this would have been, then the recession was still on. This is now, we're talking what year about? We're up to about 1928, 27? When was Keith born?
25.
25.
I suppose it was probably 26 or 27.
And the movies that he was showing then at the Opera House were in competition with the Cozy Theater.
Would they have been talkies or silence?
Oh, silent. Very silent. Maxine Cogswell played for him, but first the lady that played was Laura Arian. She was really good. She could follow those
Yeah, the tenor of the movie.
pictures and make the music match
Yeah.
up with the pictures.
Yeah.
Of course, she had a sheet to go by that come along with it,
Oh,
so she knew something about it.
Well, you were doing a little bit better financially at this time,
Yeah, we were.
and crawling out of debt, but you still had your health problems and the 3 real young ones to be concerned about and raise up.
That's right.
So there was no thought of you going back trying to teach or anything like that at this point.
No, I didn't try to teach again until
I was in high
after World
school.
War II.
Yeah. But in this time, when did you and Forrest join the Masonic Lodge and the Eastern Star?
To be real truthful, I don't remember.
It would have been in those years, though, wouldn't it?
He joined the Masons probably after we lived there 10 years, maybe.
Mm-hmm. So this would have been in the 30s sometime, rather than, this is later on. Yeah.
Mhm. And then we joined the Star together a little later.
Mhm.
How was, did you go to Huron to shop? Was most of your goods and stuff
We
bought
had-
in Wolsey?
We had 4 general stores in Wolsey when we moved there.
Hmm.
And we had a milliner's shop.
Wow.
And we had everything. We didn't need to go to Huron. But we did go once in a while. Now to buy, I don't know what, we didn't buy it much. I guess on account of the cars, what we went in to have it serviced.
Now, would the state fair
Oh, yes.
was being held in Huron?
Yes.
So you would go to the state fair each fall?
Yes, we went to the state fair when Beth was little, before June arrived. And we took her through to the baby contest, because she was supposed to be the winner. And she got scored off
Why?
because she they gave her a pencil and a piece of paper to write, and she didn't know what it was all about. Because purposely, I had never let her have a pencil, because earlier in my life, when I lived at Gary, a little boy, about 2 years old, had a pencil in his hand and fallen down and put his eye out with
Oh,
the
wow.
pencil. So I just didn't let her have a pencil. So
Sure.
she didn't know what to do with it. She picked it up and looked at it and thought that was quite a nice thing. And
So, pretty little Beth didn't get past, she failed the pencil test.
then we put her in the nursery while we made midway or exhibits or whatever we did. And I gave him a little piece of her blanket that she had had. It was one I'd made like a quilt. I used my mother's old wool fascinator as a liner and had pink silkoline cover on it. It was quite a pretty little quilt on her carriage. And that silkoline was so soft, it always came up around her neck.
Mhm.
And she got so that was all she wanted. if I put that quilt over her, she'd go to sleep right away. Well, it got soiled when she'd drag it around and so forth, and washed so many times, finally got faded out, and finally wore out. But she would take a strip of that material in her hand and suck her thumb and go to sleep. So I told the girl when I left her at the nursery, I took this out of my purse and I said, here's a piece of her old blanket. If she gets tired and you want to put her to bed, just give her this and she'll go to sleep. They thought that was something else. But we didn't know what to think of that when you told us that. But when we did it and she went to sleep, we decided you knew what you were talking about. And later, she went over to Hitchcock with Grandpa Gordon, who was selling minerals in an open Ford. And she had her boa in her hand, a piece of blanket, she always called it her boa. And it flew out.
Out the window, out the car.
She didn't have it when she got to Hitchcock. Dad didn't realize it was that important. He didn't even look for it. He thought, well, that old rag, we won't worry about that. They couldn't get her to sleep. They took all different kinds of cloth, gave to her, didn't know. Well, it was faded, grayish looking thing, so Jude Gordon got down on the floor and rolled that around on the floor to get it gray. He thought maybe she'd take it if it was dirty. But no, she never did take it. She got home, and of course I had other
You had
pieces.
some more strips.
She got her bull, she was real happy.
Well, this is just at about the time that you were coming out of, that is, the United States was coming out of the Depression and just about ready to go into another one in 1929 when the banks all failed across the country and Wall Street laid an egg and the like. And so just about that time, I suppose you were, in a sense, just as you were crawling out, you were sliding back in. Is that the way it was?
Well, Forrest had a job, and it didn't affect his paycheck, you see, at all.
The Depression of 29 and 30. Yes.
Everybody envied us because we had
Steady
income.
salary.
So we got along as well as we would otherwise. Of course, he didn't have as much extra work, I guess. But about that time, I started to be substitute carrier and made a pretty good... a substitute carrier makes more than the regular carrier, believe it or not. Because with the regular carrier, they hold out for the pension.
Oh, sure.
And
So your take home was...
they're paid by the day instead of by the month.
How often would you substitute?
Well, any time that he wanted to be gone, I'd substitute. If he was sick or something. And then he had so much vacation coming, I think at that time only 2 weeks. And I would always carry them, and he'd take care of the kid. So that money went into extra things that we wouldn't have had.
You
otherwise.
only got paid when you worked, right? You didn't get paid for being a substitute unless you were actually...
No, I had to work.
Well, so that, the Depression then, you were relatively safe from it, which helped
We
because...
still weren't out of debt, so
No.
we were still awfully hard up, but we were able to live all right.
And about that time, somebody blessed you with another child.
Yes,
About 1931.
That was in the Depression. She was a Depression baby.
I always figured that somehow.
And that's why there were so few in your class.
Right.
So Maxine was born in 1931 then.
Right.
And so now you had...
At that time, I had regained my health and was pretty well off physically. And she was a healthy baby. And I nursed her because I wasn't going through what I did with Keith. But she started to lose weight. She weighed 11.5 pounds and she got down below 11. And Forrest went into Huron to the clinic, to the baby doctor, and told him about it. And it was winter time, and roads were bad, of course, and he said, well, this is no time to bring a baby out. But he said, from what you say, she should take this formula that he prescribed, and I even forget what it was. But she was just fine. Took that and she quit fussing and slept.
Now, Beth and June and Keith were all in school by this time, so what you essentially had was like an only child here again at home.
That's right.
With Maxine.
Yeah.
And how did the older three take to their baby sister?
Oh, they worshipped her.
Well, Keith wanted to trade me for a pony.
When she was first born, he was really disgusted because she was a girl instead of a boy. To trade her off for a pony. He'd been wanting a pony for so long, his dad wouldn't even consider it because, not because he was so hard up and couldn't buy the pony, but for the fact there would be a lot of work connected with it, and you'd have to buy feed and water the pony and clean out the barns. And he knew that Keith was not old enough to do it.
He was only 6 years old.
So he didn't get it. That was why it was, of course, Forrester would say, well, we can't afford a pony. So he thought,
We figured we'd work a trade here.
trade and get one.
Well, now the kids the children are going up the hill. Were you still in the same house at the
Yes.
bottom of the hill, schoolhouse hill? When did you move into the big house on Main Street?
That was 1937,
Right.
the year I started school.
And why did you move there? Did you run out of move? It was a better house, a bigger house, or?
We had just gotten this one paid for.
It was quite a bit bigger. And it was a little bit more,
We had a small living room, and they all took piano, and some of them took other things. And the noise just vibrated the whole house, it seemed like. I just about went nuts. And that was one reason. When Forrest came home one day and he said, well, do you still want a bigger house? I said, I sure do. Well, he said, I've got a chance to trade this one in on the Newton house. Oh, I said, we don't want to go in debt again. Well, we carried this one all right and got it paid for. And he said, I think we need a bigger house. We built onto that, so it was bigger than when we moved into it, but still had a horrid living room.
and it had
With
two,
terrible stairs, and it still has that same stairs. It's
really. One fairly good bedroom, but the other two were really tiny.
Well,
One
Well-
bathroom.
The bathroom was downstairs and the bedroom's upstairs. And there were two big bedrooms, pretty good size. And we divided one into two so that Keith had a little room by himself. And then,
well, moving then to the big old Victorian house there on Main Street would give you a lot more room and everything else, and opportunities for the kids with a bigger yard. And did you do a lot of gardening in those days, Grandma?
oh yes,
What kind of things did you plant and
you name
grow?
it. We planted it.
Had an enormous vegetable garden. Dad got somebody in with a horse and plow every spring to plow the garden. But in addition to that, there was a big flower garden. Always a lot of flowers.
As Keith grew older, he did a lot of it. He was good. And he spaded up my flower gardens for me. And you were speaking of the garden in the big house.
Mm-hmm.
We had a big garden in the other place too.
I don't remember that.
We raised more things there. That is, like peanuts and what was it I raised? Colorado.
Oh, really?
Keith liked so well.
I remember the peas and beans and carrots and onions. Remember planting potatoes and planting corn,
Yeah, Max.
tomatoes.
Yeah. We always planted corn because we liked sweet corn so well. But in later years, got away from that because I got tired of cleaning out those corn stalks. After Keith wasn't around to help.
Now this was during, of course, the latter part of the 30s, 35 to 1940 in that general area. Sound motion pictures were now quite common, as well as cars, of course, and the horse and buggies were on their way out, pretty much. Radio had come in during this period of time. Did you listen to the radio a lot?
Oh, yeah, I didn't listen to it a lot, but we had a radio, and when the other folks were around, they had it on. I never have been very strong for radio or TV, I guess, because I like it quiet. And that was, I didn't have it quiet until Maxine started school, and by that time radio was coming in, so I don't know why, but noise has always irritated me.
Well, you did a lot of reading, of course, that time, because the kids grew up reading, correct?
Yes, but I didn't do a lot of reading.
Hmm.
I read to them when they were little. When I was a girl at home on the farm, I did lots of reading because I was alone. But in Wolsey, with 4 children, and sewing for myself and for them, my evenings were spent sewing.
Sewing clothes and making clothes. Mm-hmm.
Did you have electricity when you first moved to Wolsey?
Yes, lights hanging down from the ceiling, one light.
Mm-hmm.
That was about the first thing we bought, was a table lamp.
Really?
When did refrigeration, you know, instead of icebox, when did you get your first refrigerator? Would have been about 1930, I'm guessing. 31 or 32, somewhere in
I
there.
think maybe 29.
Mm-hmm.
Might even been before that. We got an electric stove, and we got the refrigerator first and then an electric stove.
That would have been a tremendous time saver and improvement, was it not?
Oh yes, very much so.
Both in terms of the stove as well as not having to...
But I remember when we first got that refrigerator, we used to push it out on the back porch and not run it in the wintertime.
Why was that?
Save electricity.
Ah.
So we got it quite a bit ahead of the stove. Because we weren't thinking so much about saving electricity after we had an electric stove, I'm sure.
Well, the big house, Max, of course, remembers with great fondness because of playing in the backyard and oak trees and things like that. But of course, the 3 older children were in junior high by this time. They must have been a handful even as junior high kids, were they not?
A handful?
Well, rambunctious and into everything.
No. We never had any youth problems. We had lots of parties. They did things.
What kind of parties would they hold, Grandma?
Well, they had skating parties. Then they would come in and have hot chocolate and something to go with it.
In the wintertime?
Uh-huh.
Ice skating parties?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in the summertime, they always had band practice. I played in the band.
What did Beth play? Clarinet, I think.
No, she played the cello. They had an orchestra.
Wow.
And when they quit the orchestra, she was out of it. But about that time, I think she went away to take nurse's training. Their school activities kept them busy.
Mm-hmm.
Maxine can tell you more about that than I can.
Well, you didn't go back to work during any of this period of time in the 30s. Now, we're up to now, say, 1940 and the beginning of World War II in 1941. Up until that time, you didn't go back to teaching or any other work.
I was busy with my family.
Did Forrest, was he working in addition to the mail route?
He worked for quite a while, but can't remember when he did quit. Well, they wouldn't let him work.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
that's
and
right.
then during World War II, and the manpower shortages, I remember it, correct me if I'm wrong, they relaxed that rule.
Uh-huh.
So that was when he went back to work, afternoons.
Well, he worked for Adolf Freezing,
Right, and the hardware.
but he did that just to help him out. He wasn't going to accept any pay at all, but he finally did. Because Marvin came over and talked to him and said, we just have to close the store if it wasn't for you.
Mm.
And we're not ready to close it. So he worked for a small salary, and then he had to quit, but I can't remember. Must have been his health.
Yeah, it was.
Somebody else worked there for a while before they closed it up.
Okay, well then Beth would have graduated in 1938
9.
from high school, and she left home and went into her training. And then June Ellen graduated in 1942
42.
I don't remember.
or 41.
42. And she went to Aberdeen.
Right. So then Keith and Max were Keith being in high school then, and Max in junior high, were the two left, in a sense, at home. And then in 1941, that's when World War II began with the attack on Pearl Harbor. And then Keith enlisted
Before he graduated.
before he graduated, and his graduation was 1944, 43.
43.
And so then he enlisted in the Navy in 1943, then he graduated, and then he went into the service in 43.
That's right.
And Max then was still at home. Mhm. And then Keith went in the Navy and went overseas. Beth and June where were they then? When Keith was in the Navy and overseas, where were Beth and June?
Well, Beth graduated about that time
From nurses training.
and went to work in Huron at the clinic. And June was in college. Then in the summer, well, Beth got married then, and her husband went into the service, and she went with him. He never went overseas. He was what was he, Max?
He was the athletic director.
Physical
athletic
education.
specialist.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And they were in Ottumwa, Iowa, and Maxine was down there with them that summer, and June had been teaching 1 year at Hitchcock. And then that summer she went to Portland, Oregon to visit. And she was out there, and Maxine was with Beth when we got word of Keith's death in the service.
And Keith was killed in an airplane accident
Yes,
in the Pacific
that's right.
after he had been through so much combat and everything else. It was such a shame that he was killed in a training accident after surviving all the combat that he had been in. And this was, of course, a major tragedy for the family.
It was really a shock because he hadn't quite gotten out to combat again. They were on their way back, and they were doing practice dive bombing with live bombs. And It was on a Sunday afternoon, Father's Day. And there were, I don't remember how many were in that group. There were at least 2 planes that went into this cloud in formation, preparing to drop their bombs when they came out. And the planes collided and everything exploded. And that was the end of 6 men, 3 in each plane. Keith was a radio man and a bomber.
And how old was he, Grandma, when he was killed?
Well, I guess he was 19. Wasn't he, Maxine?
That's the way I remember.
He was 17 when he graduated. And he was in the service 2 years.
Right.
And in his honor, they named the American Legion Post on Wolsey, which carries his name
Yes.
today.
That's right. The Legion Post had given up their charter and disbanded completely, but after World War II they reorganized, and so they gave it a little different name than it had had, because the other boy's name was Snyder, and he was from Vanilla. When they organized the Legion in the beginning, the Vanilla men joined at Wolsey. So that was why they took 1 man from Vanilla and 1 man from Wolsey to name it for. So when they reorganized, Vanilla had gone over to Hitchcock. So that's why Snyder's name was dropped and Keith's was put on. Well, Forrest was very active in the American Legion.
As a veteran of World War I.
So very active that the year that the speaker failed to show up, he gave the memorial address. And the girls said, "Well, Daddy, we wouldn't have known it was you if we couldn't have seen you. Your voice didn't even sound like you." And he was very active in the Masonic Lodge. When he was killed, or when he died, when Forrest died, he was worshipful master for the 2nd time. And he'd been on his way to Watertown, to the Grand Lodge. Couldn't get anybody else to go, and he was going alone. And someplace along the way, it was this side of Arlington, he was going to Watertown through Huron. And anyway, a horse, a young pony, just came out of the woods and just jumped right down on the road right in front of him and straddled his car, killed the horse, wrecked the car, but he could still drive it. But he came home. He didn't go to the Grand Lodge.
Well, also at this time, of course, in the mid-40s, your children started having children.
Right.
Beth. And then June got married, and also beginning the begat. So started on the long merry road to your
Quite a family.
to 34 descendants or something like that. We counted up. So you were gaining. The family was growing also during the mid-40s quite a bit. And June then was nearby because she had married Harlow Larson, local boy.
One that she'd started school with and graduated with, but never went with until after she'd taught school a year.
So she was there, and then Beth and Herb, after World War II, came back to nearby to
Washington.
Well, he came back to Huron, really, to finish his college. He hadn't finished before he was taken into service. And so we made our house big enough for them to live in it. We made the upstairs into a kind of an apartment for them. So they lived with us. She had 2 children, and the third on its way. And he would commute to Huron then, to school, on the train. Get up and take the train. So he lived there too.
So you were surrounded pretty much by a lot of grandchildren
So
at
we
that
had a
time.
house full.
Yep. And then by that time, this is now the late 40s, Max had graduated, and she went off to college at Vermilion. I mean, she graduated from high school.
Yep, that was her choice. We took her to Brookings to look things over, because she liked Vermilion the best.
Well, she liked that society, country club, Vermilion versus the hard-nosed, you're going to work hard at Brookings, I think.
I think it was the curriculum that had something to do with it.
I think so.
Yeah, sure.
But
Okay, then
of course
see.
we kind of wanted her to go to Huron so she'd be closer to home.
Surely.
We also felt that it was her decision and not ours.
During this period of time then, when you had all the grandchildren around and Forrest was still carrying on the route, did you, what were your activities outside of helping take care of the grandchildren? Did you go back teaching or working or anything?
After Keith was killed, they all thought it'd be good for me to get out. And there was a vacancy coming up out in the country. The teacher had to quit. And they had 2 or 3 substitutes in. They couldn't manage the school. And the superintendent came to the house and persuaded me to teach. I said, my certificate isn't any good. I can't teach, and I haven't got time to go to school. She says, during this emergency, I can make that certificate good. You don't need to worry about the certificate if you just take it. So I went back to teaching.
Now what did you teach? What grade level, Grandma?
1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th,
Oh.
7th, 8th.
Oh my,
With some big boys.
lots bigger than you, I suspect,
Yeah.
in 8th grade. Big raw-boned farmer boys who were still in 8th grade but were probably 14 or 15 or...
One of them was a keel. And you know how big those are.
Right.
How did you discipline those young men, Grandma?
I didn't discipline them.
Didn't have to. They respected you.
They were real good. They told tales about how their teachers had tied some of them into the seats, which I thought was unheard of.
This time you had your own car, didn't you?
No. Your dad took me back and forth.
Okay. Then you got a green 49 Chevy coupe.
No.
Louder, Max.
No, Mr. Long wanted me to teach some more. And I really wasn't very keen on it. And Forrest said if I'd get a car of my own so he didn't have to drive me back and forth, he didn't object at all. And so I decided I'd teach. So I took a full-term school. And I bought a second-hand car, a second-hand Chevy. Well, it's been years since I've driven a car that wasn't just right up to snuff, because Forrest traded every 2 years and kept his car in good shape. I came home one night and I said, I sure am sick of driving this old car. I said, what do you think about me getting a new one? said, I've got to spend my money someplace, I might just well get a car. He says, if you want a car, we'll start looking for one. So I got a brand new coupe. And finished that term, and then we took a trip the next year. And then they got me back to teaching the year after that. And then we took a trip. So finally, well, Forrest wasn't very well. And he did die quite suddenly. The school board came one night after dark. There was a knock on the door, and this Allen Township, where I'd taught 2 or 3 years, school board was on the step. I opened the door kind of cautiously because I was alone, and I see 3 men standing there. They were grinning, and I finally recognized who they were. I said, well, come on in. No, we aren't coming in. We just came to tell you that we have not hired a teacher, and we would like to have you teach our school this year. Oh, I said, that's the last thing I could do. Get up in the morning and get a car out of the garage and on the road and blizzards and stuff. No, not in blizzards. If you get up in the morning and it's stormy, just call out that there'll be no school. I said, I just don't think I can do it. Well, that's up to you, but we wanted you to know that we would like to have you. Well, after they'd gone, and for the next week, that was on my mind. And I thought, what am I going to do this winter? Just sit here all by myself? I guess I'll call and see if they'd hired a teacher. So I did. No, we're waiting for you. We figured you'd change your mind after you thought it over.
Now, what year was that, Darren?
Maxine was in Vermillion, weren't
It
you?
was 53 then.
53. And about that same time Max graduated from college.
That isn't all she did.
Oh. She graduated and got married.
That's right. And she wanted to be married in Vermillion instead of in Wolsey, because it was closer for you, your folks.
Mm-hmm.
She thought it was a kind of a halfway mark.
Mm-hmm.
But I always regretted that she didn't get married in Wolsey. But she had a nice wedding, everything turned out good, but there weren't many of our friends that got down that far to go to the wedding. Catherine and Sig came from Pipestone, and Uncle Ross came, didn't he, from Gary. But from Wolsey, no.
Well, we skipped over a very important element here we need to go back and pick up, and that's Forrest's death, which came in 1953.
Three. Quite suddenly, as you suggested. And it
Well,
was just shortly after the accident with the horse, was it not?
yes, it was. We always felt that shock of that. Well, he felt so bad that boy, he'd killed that boy's pony. That really bothered him.
But he had a history of heart problems up until
Yes.
that point.
He did that. But he was one that didn't carry his troubles on his sleeve. People just didn't know how bad off he was.
Mm-hmm.
And there was things that would bother him, but he would not let anybody know that they bothered him. He was, well, Mother Gordon said she thought the beginning of his trouble getting serious was when Keith was killed. It was awfully hard for him to accept it. Well, before that, in 1940, My brother, my younger brother that I had taken care of when he was little, was killed up in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And that bothered Forrest more than it did me, really. I'm not saying that it didn't bother me, it did greatly.
Mm-hmm.
But Forrest would just sit there in an evening, shake his head, it should have been me, it shouldn't have been Ralph. I said, well, don't say that, Forrest. Shouldn't have been you. Look what you have, a family, and he didn't.
Mm-hmm. So that plus Keith and
started.
yes.
Yeah.
How old was Forrest when he passed away?
56.
56.
Young.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, that same year then, Max got married. And of course you had many more grandchildren along the way with Beth and June's ever-expanding family. June still in Wolsey, and Beth then and Herb had moved to Sheldon by this time.
I guess we had a new baby come about every year for a while.
I think so.
And each one got a little sweeter. I don't regret any of the fact that I have a big family. I love it, and they're all so good to me.
Well, also, just a little bit before this time, you moved to, from the big house across the street to a smaller house.
Because the doctor said Forrest had to get on one floor, our bathroom was upstairs. But that was a poor move. I've regretted it, but it happened. It didn't do any good because they put that house up so high that we had so many steps to go up.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just the bathroom just the one bathroom. And
Mhm.
so Forrest, when he come from work, he always went to the basement to wash.
Yes.
So he had the
So he
steps
came
anyway.
up the steps and down the steps and then back up.
Yeah.
And
Defeated
so
the
I
whole
think he did
purpose.
more going up and down steps after we moved than he did before.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well, during and
I had a bad time with that house. You see, it was a prefab house.
Yes,
as you
right.
call it. And I wanted a house with no basement. And any contractor we talked to would not build a house in South Dakota without a basement
Because of,
of the water pipes and sewer and so forth. Well, so I consented. And then when I saw what they built for a basement, I said, we're going to have so many steps to go up. And he said, no, it'll be filled in, so you won't have that many steps. But it wasn't filled in that much. Didn't seem to make that much difference. We still had steps. And when they laid it out, staked it out, you know, for the size location. They had it so close to the street, and we were on a highway, and I said, oh, I don't want a house this far out. Oh, you wouldn't look good sitting back any farther. We want it even with the house next to you. I said, well, this isn't even with that house. It's way out in front of it. No, he says, you just got here and line it up. But I said, that's their porch. The house itself sits back. Well, he says, I guess that's true. Well, we can put it back there then. So they did. But it was still awful close to the street.
Mm-hmm.
We had a bigger backyard than front yard. Dates down, I can't remember a date right off the bat like that. You're going to want to know when Frank and I were married. When were we married?
oh, I can always tell you that date. That one is
What was it?
pretty good.
Out loud.
you and Frank were married the same year that Derry was born,
Oh, yes, that's right.
and that's 1960.
1960, yeah.
Okay, well, in
I knew
1960,
that as well as could be, but if you'd asked me, I wouldn't have been able to tell you.
okay, but by 1960, uh, Beth and
You
Herb
got
were in
that,
Sheldon. June and Harlow were on the farm in Wolsey. And Max and Bob were in Atlanta, Georgia, I guess,
Wisconsin.
or Wisconsin. And a man came a-courting by the name of Frank Balvin. How did... Okay, we're back. Now we had a little technical goof there. The year is 1960, and Frank Balvin comes a-courting. A new man in your life, a Wolsey man. How did that occur, Grandma?
Well, Leona Hartley, his stepdaughter, says she played Cupid. She was out to June's. She was a friend of June's. Visited and asked how I was, and June thought I was doing pretty good, but I was kind of lonely. Well, she says, my stepfather's lonely too. On her way back home, she stopped in to see Frank, and suggested, I guess, that he get out a little more, and said, you've got a widow lady in your church that might appreciate a friend come to see her. I didn't know that, of course. She had anything to do about it. I was sitting out in the patio on a Sunday afternoon reading, and this car pulled up in the backyard. Not in the backyard, but what would you call it?
The side yard.
Side yard. Anyway. And Frank got out and walked over toward the house. Said I didn't look very busy, and I said, no, I never am on Sunday afternoon. He sat down in a chair, and we visited, and I said, do you want to come in the house? Well, no, I don't think so. He said, I don't think that'd look very good. So he went home. But I guess later he did call and make a date to go to the movies. You know how well I like movies, but I accepted anyway. I suppose I slept through the whole thing. And that's the way it went.
And so then you got to see more and more of him, and then eventually...
Didn't see that much of him. He worked all the time. I didn't see him very often. The Balvins are hard workers. He'd go to work at 5 o'clock in the morning and quit late at night.
He was a Wolsey man whose wife had passed away quite a few years earlier also,
Yes.
and he had children.
He had stepchildren from his first wife, and he had one girl of his own.
Mm-hmm.
And she was just young when her mother died. I think she was 10 maybe, or 11.
So you were married in 1960,
60.
yeah, we just said that. And enjoyed then the same, another full, if you would, married life with Frank. And again, grandchildren still kept appearing on the scene, largely in this case Maxine's children, because Beth and June Ellen had...
Not anymore after we were married,
No.
because I was down when Derry was born, and that was...
Oh, that was the
There
last
only
one, that's right.
after that, and that
That's
was Kurt.
That's right. Okay.
No, Kurt's, Derry was the last one.
Derry was the last one, yes.
Kurt,
So,
Kurt
then-
was younger than Rick.
Mm-hmm.
So the grandchildren are still come visit and have the reunions and that sort of thing. And then, same time, you and Frank moved out of that house on Main Street to another house.
He bought an old house out closer to the edge of town and remodeled it. He wanted to know if I would move into it, if he could remodel it so I liked it. And I said, well, if I like it well enough, I'd move, but I said, I like the house I live in. So he remodeled it, and then we put them both up for sale. Mine was the one that sold. So we moved into that one, but I really enjoyed that house very, very much.
Mm-hmm.
It had quite a little walking in it compared to yours. But I guess we needed both, we both of us needed the exercise, so it didn't hurt.
And
a
then,
lovely little kitchen that I really enjoyed with a south window.
yes. And then Frank kept working at least part-time during these years after 60 into 70. I mean, he wasn't working full-time, but he was working part-time, was he not?
That's right.
And so that kept him occupied. How were you occupied during the daytime in the 60s and 70s?
Well, I didn't do much, I guess. I can't remember. Just kept house.
But you weren't teaching or working or anything like that?
No, I did a little substitute. Before that year I was married, I'd had a breakdown when I was teaching school. And the doctor said he'd see me through that year of teaching, but he says no more teaching for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the last you taught.
But my certificate was expiring. I needed to go back to summer school. So I went back to summer school to keep my certificate up. I was going to do substitute work, but that was a little bit more than I could handle.
Yeah.
Substitute teaching isn't like teaching.
No.
I'd
So-
only teach one day, and I had that whole day straightening the room out. That is, they thought they could do most anything with a substitute teacher. They found out they couldn't, but it
Took a day to establish that.
it was just a natural thing. They just wasn't a regular teacher, and they weren't settling down to work like they do with a regular teacher. If I had taught 2 or 3 days in succession, why, it'd been a different story, but it was...
Well, then you and Frank had your 25th anniversary.
Pardon?
Then you and Frank had your 25th wedding anniversary.
Yes.
And it was about that time his health started really
Oh,
deteriorating.
well, I wasn't very well myself. The garage door came down on my back,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
and from then on I never was very strong.
Yeah.
So I suppose that was what I was doing,
Yeah.
running around
Yeah.
nursing my back.
Recuperating.
But then you had the 25th, like Max says, you and Frank had your 25th anniversary.
The family did it for me down at the inn. It was real nice. I had a bad back then, I know. The chair was hurting my back, so I remember June got it and got my coat to pad the back of the chair.
That was 75.
No, 85.
85, sorry. And that's about the year that Frank's health started to be seriously deteriorating. And so then you moved in 86 into Huron, sold the house.
No, not quite.
Oh.
You lived in Huron one winter, and then you moved back to Wolsey. Then you put the house on the market after Frank was hospitalized.
Yeah.
Yes, when he was hospitalized.
And then it was on the market for a while before it sold. And when it sold, then you moved to Sunquest Village. Right?
I'm kind of in a fog. I can't remember whether
But that was the right sequence or not?
Seems like I moved before it sold. But
Maybe you did, but it was all roughly the same year.
Yeah.
And you've been there now-
It was about the 1st of March that it all happened.
And Frank passed
Frank
away
passed away last summer, summer of
in
'87.
the summer of '87.
On the 17th day of July. We'd been in a nursing home almost a year. But getting back to this anniversary, I had a letter from a friend, Maxine's friend, really, Joanne Pierce Daly. Congratulations on your 50th anniversary. And I thought, what's the matter? Well, then she went on to say, it is your 50th anniversary. You had your 25th. Now you've had your another 25th. 2 25s make 50, so it's your 50th anniversary. It was hard for me it is hard for me to realize that I lived that long with Frank.
Yes.
Time went by so fast.
Yes, we share that feeling.
Yes. Well, you had two remarkable and wonderful gentlemen in your life, Grandma. 25 years with both of them.
That's right. I've had a privileged life. Been lots of downs in it, but there's been lots of ups too.
There certainly has. Thank you very much.